Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Bacon. Welcome to the show, y'all. Every man in the game got a ghost story. Not the kind with chains and spooky noises, the kind with a face, a name, and a memory that follows you into every dark room. This is a story about a ghost like that and about the deal that created him. It all went down in a place called Apartment 3B, a grimy, forgotten little box in a forgotten building, the kind of place where secrets go to die. And on this one cold and rainy night, two men were about to make a secret that would haunt them both forever. The first man was named Hassan. He was a mid-level hustler, a man with a quiet ambition and a reputation for being a thinker, not a banger. He wasn't a kingpin. He was just trying to build a small and stable life in a world that was anything but. The second man was named Tariq. He was Hassan's muscle, his right-hand man, but he was more than that. He was his brother, not by blood, but by the streets. They had come up together, two boys against the world, and their bond was a thing of a quiet and absolute trust. Or so Hassan thought. They were in that apartment to do a deal. A big one. They were selling a kilo of uncut heroin to a new player in the city, a man from out of town who was looking to make a name for himself. The deal was worth $100,000. Enough to set them both up for a long, long time. It was supposed to be their last big score, the one that would get them out of the game. Hassan was nervous. He didn't know these new guys. And in his world, the unknown was a dangerous thing. But Tariq, with his easy smile and his cool and steady confidence, reassured him. "I got your back, H," he said. "Always." The words were a comfort, a familiar refrain from a lifetime of a shared and brutal history. The new crew arrived, three of them. Their leader, a man with cold and dead eyes named Bishop, walked in like he owned the place. The air in the small apartment got thick, heavy. Hassan could feel the static of a violence that was just waiting to happen. The deal went down, smooth at first. The money was on the table, the product was on the table. But then Bishop smiled, a slow and reptilian smile. "There's been a change of plans," he said, and he pulled a gun. It was a setup, a robbery, the oldest and most brutal story in the book. Hassan's heart stopped. He looked at Tariq, his brother, expecting him to make a move, to do something. But Tariq just stood there, his face a mask of a calm and quiet and terrifying neutrality. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just watched. And in that one and devastating moment of a silent and absolute inaction, Hassan knew. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a betrayal. Tariq had sold him out. His own brother. The world exploded in a chaos of a violence and a terror. Bishop's men were on him. They took the money, the drugs, and then Bishop walked over to Hassan, the gun in his hand. "No witnesses," he said. Hassan closed his eyes. The image of his brother's face, of his silent and devastating betrayal, burned into his mind. He heard the shot. And then, just darkness. But he didn't die. The shot, meant for his head, had hit him in the shoulder. He woke up hours later in a pool of his own blood in the quiet and empty and haunted space of apartment 3B. He was alone. He had lost the money, the drugs, his future, and he had lost his brother. He had walked into that apartment a man, and he had walked out a ghost who was about to spend the rest of his life haunting the man who had, in one and final and unforgivable act of a betrayal, killed him. The aftermath of the deal in apartment 3B was a quiet and brutal redrawing of the city's underworld map. Hassan disappeared. The streets whispered that he was dead, another casualty of a game that has no mercy. And in the vacuum he left, a new king was crowned, Tariq. He took over Hassan's operation, his territory, his crew. He did it with the backing of Bishop, his new and powerful partner. He told the streets a story of a deal gone wrong, of a shootout, of Hassan, his brother, dying a soldier's death. It was a good story, a believable story. And the streets, which have a short memory and a deep respect for power, bought it. Tariq was a good king. He was smarter than Hassan, more ruthless. He expanded the empire and the money flowed in, a river of a blood and a betrayal. He had everything he had ever dreamed of. The power, the respect, the fear. He was the man, but he was a haunted man. Every night, in the quiet of his new and expensive house, the ghost of his old friend, his brother, would come to visit. He would see Hassan's face, the look of a shocked and profound and heartbreaking betrayal in his eyes. And the guilt was a slow and corrosive poison in his own soul. He had told himself it was just business, that Hassan was too soft for the game, that he was holding them back. He had told himself it was a necessary and logical move. But in the dark of the night, when the lies wore thin, he knew the truth. It was a simple and ugly act of a greed and a jealousy. He had wanted what his brother had, and he had in the end been willing to kill him for it. And Hassan, he was not dead. He was a ghost of a different kind. He had survived, barely. An old and forgotten friend had found him, patched him up, and hidden him away. He spent 6 months in a dark and quiet room, healing his body and nursing his own and cold and patient rage. He heard the stories from the street. He heard about Tariq, the new king. He heard the lies his brother was telling. And in that quiet and lonely room, a new man was born. The old Hassan, the man of a quiet ambition and a trusting heart, was dead. In his place was a man with a single and all-consuming purpose: revenge. He was not just going to kill Tariq. That was too easy. He was going to dismantle his world piece by piece. He was going to take everything from him: his money, his power, his reputation. He was going to make him feel the same and profound and absolute sense of a loss that he had felt in that dark and bloody apartment. He was a ghost, a phantom, a man with no name, no face, no history, and he was about to start a war, a quiet and invisible and devastating war, a war of a whisper and a shadow, and a long and patient and brutal revenge. The game was not over. It had just entered a new and more deadly phase. Hassan began his war not with a bang, but with a whisper. He was a ghost, and he knew that a ghost's greatest weapon is the unseen, the unknown. He started to work in the shadows of the empire he had built and that his brother had stolen. He started with the low-level runners, the corner boys. He would appear to them in dark alleys and quiet parking lots, a phantom from a past they had only ever heard stories about. He didn't threaten them with violence. He threatened them with the truth. He told them the real story of apartment 3B, the story of a betrayal. And he offered them a choice: work for him, be his eyes and ears on the inside of Tariq's operation, or be exposed as the soldiers of a traitor. The old code, the one that valued loyalty above all else, was not completely dead. And the story of Tariq's betrayal was a powerful and corrosive poison. One by one, the younger and more idealistic members of the crew started to flip. They became Hassan's secret army, a network of spies in the heart of his enemy's kingdom. Tariq started to feel the effects, but he didn't know why. A shipment would go missing. A deal would go bad. He was losing money, losing face. He started to get paranoid. He looked at his own men with suspicion, and the trust that held his empire together began to crumble. Hassan's next move was to go after Tariq's partnership with Bishop, the foundation of his power. He knew that Bishop was a man who valued only one thing: profit. And Hassan was about to make Tariq a very, very unprofitable partner. He used his network to intercept one of Bishop's shipments, a massive haul of cocaine that was coming in from out of state. He didn't steal it, he just replaced it with a truck full of a perfectly packaged and completely worthless baking soda. The deal went down. Bishop's men paid for the product. And when they found out they had been played, the fury was biblical. They didn't believe Tariq's story that he had been played too. They saw him as either incompetent or a traitor. And in their world, there was no difference between the two. Bishop cut him off. And in doing so, he cut him off at the knees. Tariq's supply was gone. His protection was gone. He was a king in a kingdom that was now in open rebellion. He was a man under siege, fighting a war against an enemy he couldn't see. A ghost. He started to drink, to make mistakes. The cool and calm strategist was gone, replaced by a paranoid and desperate man. Hassan just watched from the shadows, a patient and methodical architect of his brother's destruction. He was not just taking his revenge, he was teaching him a lesson in the old code, a lesson in loyalty and in the brutal and final price of its betrayal. Tariq's world was a house of cards in a hurricane. His crew was in open revolt. His suppliers had abandoned him, and the ghost of Hassan was a constant and terrifying presence in his mind. He was a king with no subjects, no army, no kingdom. He was just a man, a scared and lonely and hunted man. Hassan knew it was time for the final move, the checkmate. He sent a message to Tariq, a time and a place. Apartment 3B, the place where their brotherhood had died, the place where it was going to be finally and brutally buried. Tariq knew it was a trap, but he had no choice. He had to face the ghost that was haunting him. He went alone. He walked into that dark and empty apartment, the air thick with the memory of his own and final betrayal. Hassan was there waiting for him in the shadows. He was no longer the quiet and thoughtful man that Tariq had known. He was a ghost, a specter, his face a mask of a cold and quiet and absolute rage. There were no words of anger, of accusation, just a quiet and devastating question. "Why Tariq?" Hassan asked, his voice a low and raspy whisper from the grave. "Why did you do it? We were brothers." And in that moment, in the face of his friend's quiet and profound and heartbreaking grief, Tariq finally completely broke. The lies, the justifications, the years of a carefully constructed self-deception, it all just crumbled. And he was left with the simple and ugly and unforgivable truth. "I was jealous of you, H," he whispered, the words a torrent of a shame and a regret. "You were always the one, the thinker, the leader. I was just a muscle. I wanted what you had, and I was weak." It was a confession, a final and pathetic and human truth. And Hassan just listened, his face a mask of stone. He had come here to kill him. But in that moment, as he looked at the broken and weeping man before him, the man who had been his brother, he knew that killing him would be a mercy. And he was not in the business of mercy. He didn't pull a gun. He just made a phone call, an anonymous tip to the police about a wanted fugitive, a man named Tariq, who was hiding out in a deserted apartment building. And he gave them another piece of information, the location of a shallow grave in a deserted stretch of woods upstate where a man named Bishop, the man who had been Tariq's partner, was now residing. A piece of a quiet and brutal housekeeping that Hassan had taken care of weeks before. He was giving them the whole and sordid story, the murder, the conspiracy, the betrayal. He was giving them a king, and he was giving them the man who had helped to crown him. He was giving them Tariq, and he was giving them himself. He hung up the phone. "The game is over, Tariq," he said. "And in the end, we both lost." He just sat there in the dark and quiet apartment, and he waited for the sirens. Two brothers, reunited in the ruins of their own in tragic creation, waiting for the final and inevitable and just judgment. The sirens were a mournful and final song. The police swarmed the building and they found them. There are two ghosts in a room full of them, Hassan and Tariq, the king and the man who had dethroned him. They didn't fight. They didn't run. They just surrendered. The war was over, and they were just two old and tired soldiers at the end of a long and bloody road. The trial was a quiet and brutal affair. Hassan's confession and the evidence he provided was a coffin that had been nailed shut. He laid out the whole and sordid story, the deal, the betrayal, the revenge. He was a man bearing witness to his own and tragic fall. Tariq just sat there, a broken man. He didn't put on a defense, he just accepted his fate. They were both found guilty. Murder, conspiracy, racketeering. The judge sentenced them both to life in a federal supermax facility. No possibility of parole. It was a death sentence. As they were leading them away, their eyes met for a brief and final moment. There was no anger, no hatred, just a profound and weary and heartbreaking sadness, the look of two brothers who had, in the end, destroyed each other. And this story, the story of the deal in apartment 3B, it's a story about the brutal and unforgiving nature of the game. A game that will take two boys closer than brothers and turn them into mortal enemies. A game that will take a sacred vow, a bond of blood, and turn it into a weapon. It's a reminder that in this world, the only thing that is more dangerous than a rival's ambition is a brother's jealousy. And that the only thing that is more absolute than a street code of loyalty is the cold and hard and brutal and unforgiving calculus of a man's own and desperate self-preservation. Hassan and Tariq had been brothers, and they had in the end become each other's executioners. A tragedy written in blood and in betrayal in a quiet and forgotten and haunted apartment, a place where a brotherhood had died and where two and new and terrible ghosts had been born. And so we come to the end of the first act of this tragedy, a story of two men bound by a blood oath and who in the end were drowned in a river of their own in bad blood. They were sent to the same supermax facility, not in the same cell block. The system was not that poetic or that cruel, but they were in the same and concrete world. Two ghosts haunting the same and final graveyard. Hassan did his time in a quiet and solitary peace. He had gotten his revenge, but it was a hollow and empty victory. He had destroyed the man who had betrayed him, but he had also destroyed himself in the process. He was a man who had won the war, but who had lost his own and only country. Tariq was a broken man. The guilt and the shame of his betrayal was a life sentence of its own. He spent his days in a quiet and profound and unending torment, haunted by the ghost of the brother he had loved and the brother he had destroyed. In this story, it's a warning about the corrosive and ultimately self-destructive nature of a life that is lived without a code, without a sense of honor. Tariq had chosen power over loyalty. He had chosen greed over brotherhood. And in the end, he had lost everything. And it's a warning about the seductive and deadly nature of revenge. Hassan had been a good man, a man of a quiet and thoughtful principle, but the betrayal of his brother had turned him into a monster, a cold and calculating and ruthless instrument of a vengeance that had, in the end, consumed him too. They were two men, two sides of the same and tragic coin, a coin that had been flipped in a dark and bloody apartment and that had landed on a side that had no winners, just two losers in a game that they had both in their own and different and devastating ways lost. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.